Hello, welcome to Conway Video. In this video, I'd like to talk about using interfaces to improve teamwork. You've probably had the experience of being on a team as a software developer, and you've found it very difficult to work with the people around you. Not because you're bad people, but because you all found it difficult to kind of figure out who was doing what, and there was a lot of overlap and a lot of kind of people stepping on each other's toes without probably meaning to, and a lot of sort of unclear interfaces. So you would build something, but someone else would build something that was also related to that, and then you'd find yourself merging your code, and then you'd find yourself getting into, I guess, conversations or even arguments about what this component should be and how it should work, and you know, your workmate wanted to do it this way and you wanted to do it that way, and it just was tricky and difficult. I found that there is one technique I used in a recent project, and I wanted to share it with you, and it worked quite well. It's basically using interfaces. These are something that most developers probably know about, interfaces. I mean, they're different in different programming languages, but I mean, most of us get the idea of an interface, right? Like a something that sits between one kind of piece of code or one unit and another unit. And I had this idea of using an interface in order to make it easier to work with my teammate. And so the situation was basically, we had a database over here, and we wanted to kind of check the database constantly. And whenever something updated in the database, we wanted to run it through a process, which was like multiple steps. And then at the end of the process, we wanted to produce some output into, well, a few different places. And my job was basically to build the whole thing, but you know, to work with the team that owned the database that the data was coming from, and work with them in order to make sure everything was correctly done and correctly coded according to their standards. And so already you can see that there's a bit of trickiness here with the teamwork, because you've got a little bit of unclear responsibilities, right? My responsibility is to get the data all the way from this database through this process and to these outputs. But then you've also got another team who are also responsible for this database. And so we're both kind of looking at this same database. So I needed a way to work with my teammates in the other team in such a way that I could get what I wanted, and then they could also do what they wanted with minimal fuss. The way I ended up addressing this was quite simple. I just created an interface, and the interface was basically an interface that would be on my workflow, and that the people who ran the database would call every time there was an update. And so that immediately created a nice separation of responsibilities. All that the people in charge of the database had to worry about was just calling my interface whenever the data updated. So they had to write the code and do the implementation that checks for changes, right? And that was something that they knew about, that fitted with their mental models and their knowledge, because they know about that database. So it's easy for them to create something that just queries that database and looks for changes and then calls my API. But on the other hand, I knew about the workflow I was trying to implement, but I didn't know about their database. So it was easier for me to just write the code that focuses on my workflow and just build a very simple interface that gets called when there's new data. And then I could write tests around that interface, and I could control that interface, and I could build everything, and I knew that I didn't have to worry about the database. I just had to worry about that interface and build everything to work with that interface, and the other team would supply their part of the interface. And that worked really well, actually. I built the workflow, tested it, made sure it worked, got it into a good state, and meanwhile the other team, they worked on various duties that they had to do, but eventually they got around to completing the interface. And so that also worked really well from a time perspective, because I wasn't blocked. I didn't have to wait for the other team to finish their part of it before I could start working on my part. I just used that interface to just build everything around that and make it work properly around that interface, and use automated tests, of course, in order to simulate or dummy up the data. And I guess another way that worked too was that it was very easy to report progress to managers. So you've probably had this situation come up with it where a manager is asking you, when is this going to get done? What's happening? You know, why is this taking longer than we thought, or something like that. So the way I was able to handle this was I was able to go to my manager very regularly and give them updates and basically say, here's what I have built, here's what I haven't built, but out of what I have built, this is the progress I'm making, and I'm not blocked by anything. And then if the manager asked, what about this part of it, the database part, I could say, well, I've assigned that to this team, so now you can talk to them about it and see how their progress is, and we can work that way. And that was really well a nice way of handling it, because instead of me taking on all the entire responsibility on my own shoulders, I was able to just focus on the things that I could deliver and keep my manager happy. And then the other team, they were able to focus on the things that they could deliver, including that interface, the refreshing part, and they were able to also deliver that on time because it was only a small piece and that was something they already knew about really well. So the interface also became a really nice way to divide up the tasks between us, because we could each work to an interface whose implementation was related to what we already knew. We could each specialize in what we knew best about. And I think that's where development teams work really best, is where each person gets to focus on the thing that's their real core competency that they can deliver quickly. And they can all kind of report to management effectively because everyone knows what everyone's doing, and it's easier to predict timelines that way, right? It's much easier to predict how long something's going to take if you've done it before and you kind of know what's involved, rather than if you've got lots of unknowns and lots of things that you don't know so much about. So that's it, using interfaces to help and facilitate teamwork. Thank you.